I do recommend that you open up the data file and actually do these examples along with me while watching the video. I don't think that you'll get that much out of just watching me. So if you're more actively engaged, I think you'll find that the exercises which are coming up will be a lot easier than if you just watch the video and then try to do the exercises from memory later. We're back in the data file. We've got our records selected, right? We did that in the last video, so I'm scrolling up. You see everything prior to 93 is slashed out. We're only working with the 1993 data because that was the only year in which the music variables or the questions about music preferences were asked. So going back to variable view again, this is what we're dealing with. This is what we want to look at. There are 18 variables relating to preferences for music. And to refresh your memory, we looked at this in the earlier video, but it's a 5-point scale where 1 equals like very much, 2 equals like it, 3 equals mixed feelings, 4 dislike it, 5 dislike it very much. And then they gave them the option to say, well, I don't know much about it, or NA, or whatever. They didn't answer it. Those are treated as missings. Okay, we already ran a frequency in the previous video. We looked at the counts by years, but that was really straightforward. There's no missing data. So we're going to look at frequencies now that are more typical of actual data from which you are trying to derive insights. Right? And as you get more and more into the real world examples, things tend to get a little bit messier. So you can expect it's going to get a little bit messier. So I want to look at, I'm going to start with country music because, well, why not? Like or dislike country western music. So we're going to go back to the Analyze menu. Analyze. Descriptive Statistics. Frequencies. And so I had year in here from our previous analysis. I'm taking that out. I'm interested in country, so I'm clicking on country. Now you can either highlight it and click the arrow, or you can actually just grab it. I'm holding down the left button on the mouse. You can drag it over, and that works too. Now there's some other options in here that we're not going to mess with right now. Statistics, charts, but for our purposes now, we don't need them. You can just leave everything at the default settings. So you do need to make sure that this display frequencies table box is checked. It should be checked off by default, but just make sure, double check. You can, so again, if you just click OK, it's going to run it. But like I've said several times already, I want you to get in the habit of clicking paste. And after you click paste, you'll see it has added this syntax to your syntax editor. By the way, I pasted syntax earlier. I never closed that syntax file, right? So as long as I leave that open, any additional procedures that I paste the syntax for, it will just keep appending it to the bottom of that file. So if you have an assignment and there are multiple questions, you can just keep pasting. You'll have one file that has everything. If you close this syntax file, then SPSS, when you paste something else, will just open up a new syntax file. And so this one was syntax 1. Let's say if I saved it and then closed it. If I pasted something else afterwards, SPSS would open syntax 2. And if I closed that and then I pasted something else, SPSS would open syntax 3. So it will create as many syntax files as you need, but if you leave it open, it'll just keep appending new information. And it's the same with the output viewer. If you don't close the output viewer, then every time you run something that generates output, it will just keep appending the additional output to the file. So just thought I'd mention that. Now I'm going to run this. And it shows us here, there actually were 32 defined missing responses, right? We had 22 who said don't know much about it, and 10 who answered NA. And now you'll see there's a difference between percent and valid percent. The frequencies are just the counts. We had 1,574 who provided valid answers to this question. 385 like very much, 592 like it, 364 with mixed feelings, 167 dislike it, and 66 dislike it very much. Now the percentages here take into account the fact that we've got 2% that are missing, that had invalid data. And so your total for the percentages for the valid responses in the percent column only totals up to 98%. So these are like, this is, based on that total 1606. That's what all these percentages are based on. The valid percent is based on this total, 1,574 valid responses. And so, the numbers aren't that different because we only had 2% missing. But you can see cumulative percent is based on the valid percent, right? So the 62.1% is the sum of these two. If you're making any kind of interpretive statements about the frequencies that you're running, typically we would base that on the valid percent. And especially if you had like 60% missing, you wouldn't talk about, 5% said this and then 60% were missing. You would take the 5% as a percentage of the, that the valid response. So it'd end up being, 30%. I don't know off the top of my head. But in this case, again, these are slightly different. But if I were to ask you, well, what percentage of people like country music very much? Typically, you'd make that answer based on the valid percent. About 24.5% of those that provided valid answers said they like it very much. And when it's a small difference, it seems like it doesn't really matter. But again, let's say that only like 20% of the people answered this. The overall percentage, might only be 6%. And so if you say, well, 6% like it very much, but it's only because 80% of them didn't answer the question, right? So the one that kind of gives you insight about what you would expect to find in the population amongst respondents for whom this is a meaningful question, that it's a valid question, it's really that valid percent. So now the way that the output looks here, you can see SPSS actually populated that with the labels, right? But remember, like very much equals 1, like it equals 2. Now, typically I like to see the labels in the output. It tells the story. But you do have some options with the output. If you go to edit, there's towards the bottom, there's an options option. And you'll get this window that pops up. And there's a tab, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the sixth tab over from the left, output. And you can see here, everything is set up as it's displaying labels. Now, instead of labels, you can display like, names and values. So I'll do that just, to show you as an example. And if I apply that and then click OK, if I go back to my syntax editor and I rerun the same syntax, you'll see instead of the labels, it's showing me the codes. Right, so these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 codes. And sometimes you'll want to see the codes. I think more often than not, you'll want to see the labels. But, that's an option. Another option, which you might have noticed as I was in there before, if I go to Edit Options, Output again, I can do names and labels, values and labels, and I'm doing them in both places. So I can apply that and click OK. And again, if I rerun the same syntax, you can see now it shows me both the value and the label. And so you might want to see that too, if you want to just be clear on how everything lines up. Make sure you haven't mislabeled your values or something like that. So that's the same procedure run 3 times, just different options on the output, makes the output look a little bit different. The other thing I'll point out, you can take these objects in SPSS, you can copy them. And then if you open up Excel, you can actually go and, I copied it with my mouse before. I can do paste text, and I can paste the output into an Excel worksheet. And it's not like a picture. You can actually paste the text into columns. Now these are numbers I can work with, right? I can actually add these up. I can say equals this plus this, right? And I'm getting the same number. So that can be a useful feature of SPSS where you can copy and paste your output into an Excel sheet. So I just thought I'd mention that as well. I'll just run one more for you. Let's say we wanted to look at opera. So I can go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Frequencies. And if I take country out, I'll run opera. And actually, I'm going to throw reggae in there too, just to show you. You can do multiple variables at the same time. You don't have to do them one at a time, right? And like I've been saying all along, what I want you to do is click paste and then run the syntax. But just to show you, like, this is what happens. If you just click OK, it runs it, right? So these are the numbers you can see here. We had actually a lot more people said they don't know much about opera, right? You got about 6% total missing. And it's still not a big difference. You're getting basically the same story. Here with reggae music, you actually had 19% that were missing. So you're starting to see bigger differences here in terms of the valid percent and the percent. But that's, again, just to show you, you could just click OK. You'll get your output. But if I was running lots of frequencies, and like I said earlier, and I made a mistake in defining my data file, like I picked 1987 instead of 1993. Oh, now I got to go back and do everything all over again. And so that's where having the syntax helps. It does show you in the output viewer what the syntax, the underlying syntax is, like what would have been generated if you clicked paste. It shows up as sort of like a log entry in your output viewer, but you don't have that file that you can go back and run it on if you needed to go back and rerun it. So that's the benefit of doing the pasting the syntax. I'm actually going to go back over here to edit options, and I'm going to change this back to labels. I want everything to be labels. But I wanted you to just see that you had that option there. Okay. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint deck. I actually have some exercises for you to do. So if you haven't been following along, now is the time where you're going to have to actually open up the data file and do this. So exercise 1, I want you to run a frequency on the variable wrap. And I want you to answer these questions. What percentage of respondents like it very much or like it? And how many respondents did not provide a valid answer to this question? And so you can pause the video now, run it. Shouldn't take that long to do. And then when you're done and you've got your output, start the video back up again. And so I'll be back with you in 3, 2, 1. And welcome back. If you pause the video, we're back. If you're following along in the PowerPoint, the solution is provided there, so you can double check your answer with what I have here. We had 2.9% valid percent liked it very much, 10.4% liked it. So in total, 13.2% of the respondents to this survey in 1993. So I'll remind you also again, this was 1993. I think you might get better performance on the wrap question today, like a higher percentage liking it today than you probably were getting in 1993. I don't know that for sure, but I'm just guessing. That's 13.2% have answered in those top 2 categories. Now, I might have already used this term. If not, I'm introducing it here. We sometimes refer to that, this is more of an industry term, as a top 2 box score, or just top 2 box. And if you recall, the codes for this variable, actually the higher numbers are associated with dislike it and dislike it very much, right? Those are codes 4 and 5. But the best scores, right? The best answers are the positive ones, 1 and 2, like very much and like it. So when you group those 2 together and get that cumulative percentage, we would call that a top 2 box score. Especially with 5-point scales, sometimes we will focus instead on just the top box score, which in this case would be like very much, which would be a top box score of 2.9%, top 2 box score 13.2%. To answer the other question that had been posted, we had 4.5% that provided invalid or missing answers, and that was 72 cases that did not provide an answer. Analyze, descriptive statistics, frequencies. I'll take these 2 out, and I'm going to grab the wrap variable, click it over, paste, and then I will run this. On the selection. And you should get those same answers that were there in the PowerPoint. Okay, we have another exercise. Run a frequency on the variable race. So race is the variable name. The label is a little bit more descriptive. What percentage of respondents are white? What percentage of respondents are black? And then does the top 2 box mean anything with respect to this variable? So once again, I will ask you to pause the video, go ahead and run this analysis, and then when you have your output, start it back up again. And I will be back with you in 3, 2, 1. Welcome back. Again, the answers are provided here in the PowerPoint. This is what you should see. There actually are no missing cases on the race variable. We had 1,347 white respondents, 179 black respondents, and they just grouped every other racial category into the other bucket, which comprised 5% of our sample, of our 1,606 cases. Now, you could have gone through the menus to do this. I'm demonstrating it for you here. I'm going to do it a little bit differently. We had the syntax here, and this is what I meant by saying, when you get comfortable with the syntax, you can do things faster. I could just copy that syntax, and instead of going through the menus, I'll just say I want to run the frequencies on race, and run that selection. And there are the answers. Now, I did that without going into the menus. I did that all with the syntax. Does it matter, especially at this stage? No. If you're more comfortable going through the menus and you don't feel like manually updating programming code, essentially, that's fine. You can do that. Just keep using the menus. It's usually a gradual process. And I don't type stuff from scratch in SPSS. I'll usually use the menus to create some initial chunks of syntax. And then where it's beneficial to me, I'll edit them and make some manual changes and copy and paste. So the menus are always available to you as a tool, and I think most of you will continue to use them in some capacity. But as we get into some fancier examples down the road, I think you'll see the value of being able to use the syntax. So that's it for these frequency tables. In the next section, we will we'll look at the analysis of categorical data. Like everything we've been doing so far is what we call univariate statistics. We've been running numbers on a variable. But where you really start to get into the analysis of data is when you look at relationships. What is the relationship between two and eventually two or more variables? And so that's where we will pick up in the next video.